good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 93 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we are finally starting a conversation that we have been looking forward to for a very long time.
We'll head over to the common room and start the party in just a moment, folks. But first, my name is Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Aragorn to my Éomer. See, I can start using that again. Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Sean. Though, in fairness, it's probably going to be at least a couple of years before we meet Éomer on the plains of Rohan. Folks, today
True.
Yeah, really.
Be here before we know it.
Absolutely. It's going to be here so quick. Folks, today we are finally talking about The Lord of the Rings, but in true Prancing Pony Podcast fashion, we are not going to start on the narrative just yet. The Lord of the Rings is an important book to us, well, to all of us, not just Sean and me. So we want to take our time, and that means starting the way we started The Hobbit, by looking back at the history of the book, its composition, its publication, and hopefully a little time to talk about what it's meant to us.
And that should certainly take an entire episode if we give it the full Prancing Pony Podcast treatment.
You're going to make me get up my special effects, aren't you?
No, that's all right. That's all right. It's already got weight. Just the words themselves have so much weight.
It really does, yes.
So we're gonna spend this episode doing just that, and I think that's gonna kick us off the right way, so we can start reading through the story next time. We promise, folks. It's only a week away, and for anyone who's wondering, yes, we will be starting with the prologue,
maybe even the foreword.
Ooh.
Now, we don't want to delay any of this any longer than we have to, so we want to go ahead and get started. But first, it's time for another Tolkien Quote of the Day.
All right. Well, this one is part Tolkien Fun Fact and part quote of the day, I guess. While I was rereading some of Humphrey Carpenter's biography for this episode, I came across this quote, which I don't think we've talked about before, but it's a great story, and it's a fantastic quote that I think is really fitting for the start of Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
So, a little background. After The Lord of the Rings was published, Tolkien was invited to all sorts of little gatherings of fans all over the world. According to Carpenter, he only ever accepted one invitation from fans, and that was to attend a Hobbit dinner at a bookstore in Rotterdam in the Netherlands in March 1958.
Now, that was the dinner where they served a multiple course dinner, at least 6 courses, quite possibly more. Only 6 that we found the names of. All the dishes were inspired by The Lord of the Rings. They served stuff like egg salad a la Barlam and Butterbur, and everyone's favorite, maggot soup, which, despite
probably
its
needs
name,
a little explanation.
Probably. It was actually a mushroom soup, as you might be able to figure out if you think about it. But with that name, most people would stay far away from it.
Yeah, they certainly would. And that is exactly the event we're talking about here. So on to the quote. Tolkien gave a speech at that dinner in which he kind of got into character. He sort of gave a parody of Bilbo's birthday party speech. But he ended it with a quote that's both funny and also kind of lovely. So here it is. He said, "It is now exactly 20 years since I began in earnest to complete the history of our revered Hobbit ancestors of the Third Age. I look east, west, north, south, and I do not see Sauron, but I see that Saruman has many descendants. We hobbits have against them no magic weapons. Yet, my gentle hobbits, I give you this toast. To the hobbits. May they outlast the Sarumans and see spring again in the trees."
To the hobbits indeed.
I love that. We spent so much time in the last episode talking about that Germanic kind of grittiness, all the nothing good can ever last, all that stuff. Yeah.
We're all going to die, backs against the wall.
Right, exactly.
Which makes me think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, by the way, right? That when the Encyclopedia Galactica finally goes under, that they'll be the first with their backs against the wall or something like that.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
But yeah, no, there was it was a fairly dark episode, I think, last time. And I think I wanted to start with this because this reminds us of the importance of hope.
Yeah.
And you talked about this. We talked about this, about, the idea that nothing good can ever last. But you also mentioned, nothing evil can last either. Right. And I really love the way you get that here. The hobbits may outlast the Sarumans. We may see spring again in the trees. Everything is going to change. Or I might even go so far as to say changes aren't permanent, but change is.
But change is. Well played, sir. Well played. I knew that was coming. Well, the second you said the changes are permanent, I'm like, well, yeah, I know where we're going now.
Yep. A modern day warrior.
You get a little rush early on in season 3. There's your rush quote already. Yeah, I love this quote, by the way. Thank you for sharing it with us. It is, like you said, a classic reminder of the importance of hope and maintaining the light in the darkness, against the monsters that are outside the circle. And it also
Mm-hmm.
gives us a reminder about hobbits. They are not immortal elves. They possess no magical weapons like Glamdring, but they are doughty at bay. They last.
Yeah.
So I really like that. But I also wanted to mention that the dinner was something that was also the subject of Tolkien's letter number 206. He wrote this to Rainer Unwin in part to thank him for covering travel expenses to Rotterdam. He says of his host that, quote, he was still a little upset about the hilarity caused by maggot soup on the menu. It was, of course, mushroom soup, but he said he would not have chosen the name if he had known all the names of the English vermins.
The vermins.
The English vermins. I love it.
That's great.
That's
fantastic.
It really is. There's another fascinating tidbit about the gathering. Tolkien mentioned how pipeweed seems specially to have caught on. He describes the pipes and the jars of tobacco that were on the table, as well as posters promoting Longbottom Leaf, Old Toby, and Southern Star.
That's right, yeah.
All provided by a Dutch tobacco firm, I believe by the name of Van Rossum. But anyway, it's just
a tobacco firm, you say, not a firm selling something else.
It's not a firm selling something else. That's correct. That's right. It is just another reminder that pipeweed is, of course, tobacco, despite Jackson's implications to the contrary. But that is another episode, and I'm sure we will be talking about that.
Certainly.
Maybe soon, because Concerning Hobbits includes a section on pipeweed.
Yeah, concerning pipeweed, yep.
That may very well be next episode. Sean, we should probably get on with the discussion. I know everyone listening is looking forward to it as much as we are.
I think we should get on with it. But first, before we begin...
Oh, that's right. The Prancing Pony Podcast wants to thank Emily Austin Design for once again sponsoring this week's episode.
Yeah, as we've walked through the Legendarium on the show, one of the most striking elements of Tolkien's works is how they can conjure such powerful images in our minds.
That's true. And when we attended Mythmoot, we got to meet Emily Austin. Now, she's a fine artist, very passionate about capturing and creating those images. Through bright, colorful, and really wonderfully detailed paintings, Emily brings glimpses of the wonder and beauty of Tolkien's works right here into the primary world. And I have to say she did it so well, I ended up buying one of her originals.
And I would advise everyone, you really should check out Emily Austin Design on Facebook for frequent doses of artwork inspired by Tolkien and other master storytellers. Mm-hmm. Prints and originals are available for purchase, and you can even commission Emily to create a one-of-a-kind Tolkien painting just for you.
That's right. And as a special treat for listeners of the Prancing Pony Podcast, Emily Austin Design is offering a 10% discount off any website purchases through September 30th. Just visit emilyaustindesign.com/shop and use code BREE to secure your discount. Now, that's emilyaustindesign.com/shop, discount code BREE. The town, not the cheese.
BREE, that's right. Mm-hmm. And we'll be sure to put that link along with links to her other social media channels in our show notes for you as well.
That's right. And I believe we have one other thing before we get started.
Yeah, we do. We'd also like to give a quick shout out to Luke Shelton. Luke's another person we got to know at Mythmoot. He's a Tolkien and medieval scholar who's doing research for his PhD on how young readers interpret The Lord of the Rings. He's looking for participants to share opinions about the book as part of a research study, and he would love to hear from you if you're under 18, or if you know someone who is, he'd love to hear from them. So if you're interested in sharing your thoughts, please consider reaching out to him. You can find him online at Luke-Shelton, that's SHELTON.com/PhD-research.
Now, if you're over 18, like me and Sean and just about everybody else, and thus not a young...
talk about how much older.
Yeah, I know. No. I'm not going to... 18? I don't remember how long ago that was, but it was a long time ago. So if you're not a young reader, you can still send him your thoughts, because he's also got a blog going called the Tolkien Experience Project. And there, anyone of any age can respond to a few questions about your experience of Tolkien's work and share your story of Tolkien discovery with other readers around the world. Now, Sean and I have actually both submitted responses, and those are due out in a couple of months or so. It was a lot of fun putting those together. Now, you can find that project at luke-shelton.com/Tolkien-experience-project. And please don't worry about all the hyphens. We're going to put a link to both of Luke's projects in our show notes. So check our website.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And definitely worth checking out. It was a lot of fun, and he's doing some really cool work over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's probably time to get into this, Alan. What do you say? And
I think it is.
I think the one last thing before we really start
Mm-hmm.
talking here is probably to introduce folks to our sources that we've been using
That's a good idea.
and that we
Yeah.
will be using. We'll be referencing several sources throughout this episode and also throughout our reading of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
And
yeah.
all of
Yeah.
these books would be a great addition to your Tolkien shelf. We have links available on the official library page on our website. But I would start with The Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion.
Yeah.
That's by Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull, two preeminent Tolkien scholars.
Mm-hmm.
This book in particular is the source of a lot of the historical information we're going to be talking about today.
It's true.
And then once we get into reading the text, we'll be spending some time with the history of Middle-earth, and that's going to be mostly volumes 6 through 9. Those are the volumes where Christopher Tolkien gives the composition and some of the early drafts of Lord of the Rings. He gives them that full history of Middle-earth treatment with the incomplete drafts or the rejected drafts in his commentary. We're going to be mostly focused on volume 6 in this season. That's the one called The Return of the Shadow.
That's right. Now, there's also the J.R.R. Tolkien Reader's Guide by Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond. Now, that's not to be confused with their Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion. They are separate works. The Companion, mentioned earlier, is a series of annotations to specific passages in the order they appear in the book. It's a little like Douglas Anderson's annotated Hobbit, except the annotations are in a separate volume, because putting notes into The Lord of the Rings would mean hiring a team of oxen to carry around the resulting volumes.
You're not kidding, man. Just
wow.
the annotations in that book. I mean, it's a hefty volume.
Would I love to see an ebook that combined them so that it was truly an annotated copy of The Lord of the Rings? So I just
that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be
annotated
wonderful
digital copy. That would be neat.
Oh, the researcher's answer to everything right there.
If anybody at HarperCollins wants to put that together, we'd buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'd like, I'll do the audiobook. I'll read the notes.
There you go.
Anyway, the guide, so that's the Reader's Companion. The Reader's Guide is an alphabetical reference of names and topics. It's a wonderful resource, but very different. So just make sure that you get those two straight. And then, of course, there's Humphrey Carpenter's biography of Tolkien and the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. We've been referencing those since episode 1. We'll also likely reference Raymond Edwards' more recent biography of Tolkien and any other number of volumes. Now, please rest assured that any book we mention will be listed in the show notes for the episode it appears in, and it will have a place in our official library at theprancingponypodcast.com. As we like to say on the Prancing Pony Podcast, we do all the reading so you don't have to.
That's true, but you should still do the reading.
Absolutely.
So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started?
At the very beginning?
Kick us off? Yeah, it seems like it is a very good place to start. Why don't we go ahead and start with sort of how, sort of the inception of Lord of the Rings. How did it come about?
Well, you remember that The Hobbit was published on September 21st, 1937. Now, if you want a refresher on the history of how that came to pass, go have a listen to episode 53. The initial print run of 1,500 copies was sold out by Christmas, just 3 months later. Now, today, that may not seem like much, but back then, that's a smashing success. So only a few weeks after The Hobbit was published, on October 11th, 1937, Stanley Unwin of Tolkien's publisher wrote to Tolkien saying that a large public would be clamoring next year to hear more from you about hobbits.
Yeah, and Tolkien actually wrote back just a few days later on October 15th, and he seemed happy about the positive reaction to The Hobbit, but he did add something. His happiness was tempered a little bit. He said,
You might say, yeah.
You might say, all the same, I am a little perturbed. I cannot think of anything more to say about hobbits. Mr. Baggins seems to have exhibited so fully both the Took and the Baggins side of their nature, but I have only too much to say, and much already written, about the world into which the Hobbit intruded. You can, of course, see any of it, and say what you like about it, if and when you wish. I should rather like an opinion, other than that of Mr. C.S. Lewis and my children, whether it has any value in itself, or as a marketable commodity, apart from hobbits. But if it is true that the Hobbit has come to stay, and more will be wanted, I will start the process of thought, and try to get some idea of a theme drawn from this material, for treatment in a similar style and for a similar audience, possibly including actual hobbits. My daughter would like something on the Took family. One reader wants fuller details about Gandalf and the Necromancer, but that is too dark.
Now, basically what he's saying is he really doesn't want to write another Hobbit book. He wants to finish and publish the Silmarillion. That's the world into which the Hobbit intruded. But if people really want another Hobbit, well, he'll see what he can come up with. As long as it's not too dark, right? And doesn't have too much to do with Gandalf. or the necromancer.
No, never, ever.
Never. Obviously, this code turned out to be more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
Yeah. Yeah, he ended up tossing that one out pretty quickly,
much,
it seems.
pretty much, right? Yeah, just about chapter 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a few weeks later, in November, he actually hand-delivered some of the Silmarillion material to Stanley Unwin in London, along with some other stuff. I kind of just picture him just handing a big bundle of papers to Stanley Unwin.
Yeah.
Some of the Silmarillion stuff, like, the Lay of Lathian, the Lost Road, Farmer Giles of Ham,
Right.
all just like for consideration for publication.
Exactly. And all loose and, total loose leaf, paginations off. I mean,
Yeah.
Now, when we say some of the Silmarillion material, we do not mean an organized manuscript of the Quintus Silmarillion or anything like that.
No.
Humphrey Carpenter actually described it as a bundle of manuscripts that had arrived in a somewhat disordered state. Okay. And the only, somewhat.
That must be where I got that from. Yeah.
Probably. And the only clearly continuous section seemed to be the long poem, The Jest of Beren and Luthien. So this poem was passed to a publisher's reader. Now, the reader didn't think much of it. In fact, in his report, was very rude about the rhyming couplets, but he hastened to say that he found the prose version of the Beren and Luthien story enthralling. Tolkien had presumably attached it to the poem for the purpose of completing the story, for the poem itself was unfinished.
Yeah, and so that's Humphrey Carpenter saying that back in, the late 70s. And, of course, we now know that poem was unfinished because that's what became the Lay of Lathian. And, of course, that's still unfinished.
Still unfinished. And will be for eternity, yes.
But just, I don't know. I like the idea of just taking a moment to think about what it must have been like for this publisher's reader to get incomplete poems and just like scattered notes and stuff as a submission for publication.
This was the guy that just wrote your smash big hit, The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And you're thinking this is going to be this polished story about something really cool. And then you're just met with this dense, scattered series of notes. And
you would not have any idea what to make of it. I mean, no. And so not surprisingly, Allen and Unwin were not interested in it. Unwin actually wrote to Tolkien saying, the Silmarillion contained plenty of wonderful material, which might be mine to produce further books like The Hobbit, rather than a book in itself. So he asked for a new Hobbit book, or at least he asked for a collection of short stories, more Farmer Giles type stuff.
Right. Well, Tolkien considered it, and in December of 1937, in letter number 19, he wrote to Stanley Unwin, seemingly giving in to fate, but certainly not very happy about it. Here's what he had to say.
True.
I did not think any of the stuff I dropped on you filled the bill, but I did want to know whether any of the stuff had any exterior non-personal value. I think it is plain that, quite apart from it, a sequel or successor to The Hobbit is called for. I promise to give this thought and attention. But I am sure you will sympathize when I say that the construction of elaborate and consistent mythology in 2 languages rather occupies the mind, and the Silmarils are in my heart, so that goodness knows what will happen. Mr. Baggins began as a comic tale among conventional and inconsistent Grimm's fairy tale dwarves, and got drawn into the edge of it, so that even Sauron the Terrible peeped over the edge. And what more can hobbits do? They can be comic, but their comedy is suburban unless it is set against things more elemental. But the real fun about orcs and dragons, to my mind, was before their time.
So he's really kind of plugging this idea of the First Age. Like, there's a lot of really good stuff about the First Age that
I got some great stories here, Stanley. Come on, man.
Yeah, right. And all that stuff is much more interesting than, why do you want to know more about hobbits?
You don't want more hobbits?
Why do you want more hobbits? Hobbits are just hobbits.
It was just a comic tale, and he just kind of ended up in my world. But, okay, fine.
Yeah. It's fascinating. He actually, interestingly enough, included a note in that same paragraph, I believe, asking, and I love this, and I just think it needs to be out there.
Sure.
Do you think Tom Bombadil could be made into the hero of a story? Tom Bombadil had actually already appeared in the poem "The Adventures of Tom Bombadil."
Right.
The first poem in the collection that now has that name, and that poem was one of the things that Tolkien gave to Unwin in that big bundle of papers.
A big pile of manuscripts.
So I kind of feel like, wow, that might be the genesis of why he was included in The Lord of the Rings at all. He probably just thought, wow, hey, I like this character. Maybe I should put him in the book.
Yeah, boy, we're going to have so much fun when we get to Tom. That's for sure.
That might just, well, no, we couldn't possibly do this, but an episode unto itself probably would not answer all the questions about Tom.
That may be the first first place where we actually incorporate a new segment called The Council, where we talk about differing expert opinions and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Or we could just call that segment Shrug.
Or we still don't know.
Yeah. Inconclusive. Anyway, so 3 days later, Tolkien wrote to Allen and Unwin again, and he said that he had begun work on a new book about hobbits. There was much rejoicing.
Yay!
But I have to say that rejoicing, at least on the part of his publishers, cooled pretty quickly, didn't it? Because once he started writing, the actual completion of the manuscript took 12 years.
Keep that in mind, folks, because we are going to go through this process in this episode in something much closer to 12 minutes, so buckle your seatbelts.
Yeah, no
kidding. Much like what we saw with The Hobbit, the composition of The Lord of the Rings happened in waves or bursts with breaks in between. And Tolkien, being Tolkien, did a lot of restarts and rewrites along the way.
Yeah, and Christopher Tolkien, this is actually where the history of Middle-earth gets really helpful. Christopher Tolkien outlines basically 3 phases of composition of just the first part of the story. And all of these are collected in The Return of the Shadow, which gets the Fellowship basically up to Moria. Christopher Tolkien writes in the foreword to The Return of the Shadow, which is as I said before, History of Middle-earth, Volume 6. Mm-hmm. He writes, "The first chapter was itself reconstituted 3 times before the hobbits ever left Hobbiton. But the story then went all the way to Rivendell before the impulse failed." And that was all the first phase. He goes on to say, "My father then started again from the beginning, the second phase, and then again, the third phase. And as new narrative elements and new names and relations among the characters appeared, they were written into previous drafts at different times. Parts of a text were taken out and used elsewhere. Alternative versions were incorporated into the same manuscript, so that the story could be read in more than one way, according to the directions given. To determine the sequence of these exceedingly complex movements with demonstrable correctness at all points is scarcely possible."
Gee, really?
I guess so. Yeah.
That's just incredibly hard. It's amazing that he was able to make sense of it all, to even collect it and put it together in the history of Middle-earth. And, well, frankly, we can't thank him enough for his efforts, because it really does shed some light on all this.
Yeah, it does. And it is fascinating stuff, as we were talking about, in the last episode. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad we have it. I think it's a really cool resource full of just interesting information. Like you said, sheds light. We do know that in February 1938, Tolkien asked the folks at Allen and Unwin to have Rayner Unwin, now 12. Remember, Rayner Unwin was Stanley's son, the one who had written that fantastic review of The Hobbit when he was 10 or 11. I think
10, I believe, because then he said
saying 8-year-olds would love it.
8 and 9, yeah. Something.
So Tolkien asked them to have Rayner Unwin, who's now 12, to take a look at it, and he said, "I have no confidence in it, but if he thought it a promising beginning, could add it to the tale that is brewing."
Wow.
No confidence in it. Can you? I mean,
none. Wow.
Honestly, amazing.
And he's going to give it to a 12-year-old and say, "Well, if this 12-year-old boy has, thinks it's got a promising beginning, I guess I could write it."
Yeah, because 12-year-olds are so positive, and they're so good at providing objective feedback about.
Exactly. Objective feedback is exactly what I expect from a 12-year-old.
Yeah, that's who you want to bear your
straight face.
That's who you want to bear your creative soul to, as a 12-year-old boy.
I want the fate of my entire creation's existence hanging on the words of a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Said no one ever. Except for Tolkien, apparently.
Apparently. It's like the little boy in the Twilight Zone, the one who can the one who can make people disappear and make all kinds of bad things happen. So
man. So everybody's super nice.
Yeah.
Here, boy, have some candy. Here, you can watch TV, sure.
Right, yeah.
Well, already by this time, Tolkien had determined that the plot of the new Hobbit book was going to revolve around Bilbo's magic ring, which he was going to give to his heir to get rid of it, because you must either lose it or yourself. Now, he'd even worked out that the ring was linked to the necromancer.
So there went that rule.
Yeah, that was fast.
Yeah. Okay, let's make it the necromancers. By September 1938, Tolkien had gotten as far as Rivendell, And then he spent the rest of the year making some changes to the cast of characters, actually going back and doing some rewrites to turn characters like, oh gosh, I can't even remember some of the names, like Bingo and Odo.
Oh, goodness.
Turning them into, Frodo and Merry and Pippin and so forth. He also introduced Sam Gamgee at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. And he wrote the first version of The Shadow of the Past. So that's really when I think a lot of the deeper backstory started emerging into the draft.
That's how he was able to tie it more closely into the Legendarium as a whole.
The Legendarium, yeah.
Yeah. So in February of 1939, so just about, 5 months later, he sent a letter to C.A. Firth at Allen and Unwin saying, and no, I'm not making this up, I think I shall make a special effort at the expense of other duties to finish it off before June 15th.
Oh, Professor. We love you.
My dear Professor, I don't think you could finish that before June 15th.
No.
Clearly, he had no idea just how big the story was going to get.
No, he really didn't. I mean, I think he just didn't. I think he probably thought he was writing something that was Hobbit length,
Right.
He had no idea that he was writing the first, volume of a huge 3-volume book that I will not call a trilogy.
We'll desperately try not to. I know we've done it before.
We have. It's hard because there's just so much out there. Everybody refers to it as a trilogy. We'll get into this later.
Yeah,
we digress.
We have a whole section on that.
Yeah. So he continued writing through 1939. By December of that year, he had gotten as far as Moria. And at that point, he took a hiatus. He actually didn't resume writing until August 1940.
See, wise people take hiatuses. I'm just saying.
That's right. That's right. We learn from the best, folks. We learn from Professor Tolkien himself.
I just had to point that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Tolkien was really good at this. We saw this with episode 53 and The Hobbit, how he would write in these phases. Ratliff called them phases too. Probably got the nomenclature from Christopher Tolkien. That he would write a whole lot and then he would stop for like a year and then he would come back to it and he'd write a whole lot and then he'd come back. We'll see this over and over with Lord of the Rings. Came back after hiatus in August 1940, and by this point he had a whole new plot outline. He had to go back to the beginning to make some changes to fit with, kind of a more serious, slightly more grown-up tone to the book.
Yeah, the tone, right.
And this is now getting into what's called the fourth phase in The Treason of Isengard, which is actually History of Middle-earth, Volume 7. But here's where he started introducing Saruman, and he started adding some of Strider's backstory and, all that good stuff we know and love.
Yeah.
He kept on going. Sometime around the end of 1941, he had actually gotten to the Lothlorien. So, now we're getting somewhere.
There you go. Yeah.
And then by the beginning of 1942, he had actually gotten up to the beginning of Book 3, what would eventually become the beginning of The Two Towers.
Something like 4 years after beginning, but yes.
Yeah.
He continued to make progress through 1942 and had gotten through Book 3 by the end of that year. In December of that year, he wrote to Stanley Unwin, and this is in letter number 47, to say that The Lord of the Rings was approaching completion. I hope to get a little free time this vacation and might hope to finish it off early next year. Once again, slightly blind optimism. No idea just how big this story was going to get. But, the thing is, even if he had been close to finishing, he didn't get much work done in 1943 really at all. He sort of hit a brick wall at that point. Humphrey Carpenter points out a few potential reasons for why he kind of got stuck. First off was his famous perfectionism, his niggling.
Yeah.
He said, and this is a quote from Carpenter, not content with writing a large and complex book, he felt he must ensure that every single detail fitted satisfactorily into the total pattern. Geography, chronology, and nomenclature all had to be entirely consistent.
We'll see. And as readers, we can listen to that and think, well, yeah, of course, that's
right.
Great. And these are great things to us, of course. And that's why we love it so much. That's why that secondary world is so real.
Exactly.
But
this is what all that hard work pays off with the belief, the secondary belief. Yeah.
Right. But think about that from the perspective of Tolkien himself. And maybe, folks out there who have done some writing before probably know what I'm talking about. That kind of attention to detail is going to take its toll on your productivity.
Yeah. It will.
It had
page
to be.
Count's going to go down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. If you're focusing on all that stuff, it's great. But you're going to be focusing so much on getting everything right that, you are just going to have a slow pace. It had to have been painstaking for him to do this for so long.
Must have been.
And I'm sure it was very satisfying to him. I probably shouldn't say satisfying because I don't think he was ever totally satisfied with the finished product. But
No, I see what you mean. Yeah.
well, because he was constantly thinking of ways to change things, thinking of things he wished he had done better. So
Right.
probably satisfying from a creative perspective. But I think like most creators, he probably saw the finished work and wished he had done things a little differently. But
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely very frustrating in any event.
Certainly.
I know. I think this also came from Humphrey Carpenter. It did say that he was also spending a lot of time on the languages. Right, he was just kind of
That's
creating
true.
some of the stuff that gives a
Hmm.
little bit more dimension to the world. And interestingly, it was also around this time that he wrote Leaf by Niggle. So I kind of saw that, and I was just thinking like, well, he just kind of found himself inspired to work on other things. But
I
when we were talking about this, you pointed out something very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like his efforts towards providing those precise details for Lord of the Rings might very well have been one of the inspirations for Leaf by Niggle.
Yeah,
I mean, here he is really classically being Niggle here,
yeah,
trying desperately to fit everything in, to get that leaf just right, and then to move on to the next
yeah,
leaf and realizing I'm never going to finish this whole tree.
yeah.
But yeah,
I think
yeah.
you're right. And I remember, well, I don't remember in great detail, but I remember reading the story of how he started writing Leaf by Niggle. And the idea came to him in a dream, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
He woke up one morning with this idea in his head and he said, I've got to write this thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to think about why he might have dreamed that, because he was spending so much time getting all
Hmm.
these details right for Lord of the Rings. And so he woke up with this idea, and then suddenly that idea consumes him
Yes,
instead of
exactly.
Lord of the Rings. It's fascinating just to think about how his mind
And
worked.
boy, it makes me just, I can't wait to get to Leaf by Niggle. We're going to have to
Yeah. Yeah,
fit
no
that in
kidding.
before we get to the end of 6 more seasons.
Yeah. Well, we might
Some
take
sort
a
of
little
mid-season special or something.
take a little detour, a little special. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So another thing that I think was probably slowing him down was World War II was in full swing
Oh,
by this
well,
time.
yeah, that's true.
We're talking 1943 now.
Hmm.
Christopher had entered the Royal Air Force in 1943. I know that had to be
Yeah.
weighing heavily on Tolkien's mind. I think that's
Oh,
obvious. Just
absolutely.
all you have to do is look at
Look at the
Carpenter's
letters.
collection of
Look
the
at
letters and just see
yeah,
how many letters he wrote to his son during that time. And
yeah.
there's a few pages that it's just one letter to Christopher after another.
Hmm.
And so, all this going on in his mind. And as a result of all this, he didn't end up getting back to writing The Lord of the Rings until spring of 1944. And
Wow.
that's when he finally started on book 4, where we pick up with Frodo and Sam in Two Towers. In one of many letters to Christopher, one of those many letters we were just talking about, he
Yeah.
wrote that, I have begun to nibble at Hobbit again.
Huh.
I have started to do some painful work on the chapter which picks up the adventures of Frodo and Sam again.
Wow. Wow. Well, what? We also need to give a quick shout out to Faramir, who first appeared similar time frame in May of 1944.
Oh,
Tolkien
yeah,
wrote to Christopher about him too, and this is in letter 66. I'm sure we've mentioned this quote before, and if we haven't, we're going to, probably many, many times. And here is the quote. A new character has come on the scene. I am sure I did not invent him. I did not even want him, though I like him. But there he came, walking into the woods of Ithilien. Faramir, the brother of Boromir, and he is holding up the catastrophe by a lot of stuff about the history of Gondor and Rohan, with some very sound reflections, no doubt, on martial glory and true glory. But if he goes on much more, a lot of him will have to be removed to the appendices, for already some fascinating material on the Hobbit tobacco industry and the languages of the West have gone.
I want to linger on that a little bit. This idea that
Yeah.
that Faramir showing up was holding up the catastrophe by a lot of stuff about the history of Gondor and Rohan.
Yeah.
That's
brilliant.
that's like this. That's the stuff that we think of when we think of Lord of the Rings.
Right.
He didn't really think. Again, he didn't think the story was going to get that big. He didn't think he was going to go into so much detail about the history of these two nations and all the history and all the stuff going on in that region.
Right.
We can start to see why the Fellowship seems to get from the Shire through Rivendell and then down to that area, down to the south,
Right.
very quickly, all in the space of one book, and then they spend the next 2 books in that same area.
That's true.
It's like
That's
he got and that's the stuff we love, right? That's what gives the world that characteristic that we love, that depth. Yeah.
That sense of true history. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so cool. And again, he didn't really set out, I don't think,
No.
to write all that stuff. It just sort of showed up. And Faramir seems to be kind of the catalyst for a lot of it for him.
He really is. I also love how the very practical writer part of him is like, well, if he goes on much more, like he's not in control of what Faramir's saying.
Yeah.
But if he goes on much more, I'm going to have to put a lot of them in the appendices.
Have to boot
and he
him
seems disappointed that a lot of the stuff is already there. The material on the tobacco industry, the languages of the West and things like that. Though I think the bit on the tobacco industry ended up moving from the appendices to the
prologue.
Yeah. But great stuff. Just great stuff.
So cool. And I guess maybe because of my interjection that ended up not being such a quick shout out about Faramir. But come on, folks, it's Faramir. We all love him.
Yeah.
We love him. You love him.
Everybody loves Faramir. Except for Denethor. Except for Denethor. I mean, really.
That hurts. That hurts a little bit.
It's true. Doesn't hurt as much as a fire.
Your father loves you, Faramir.
He'll remember that before the end.
Oh man.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Soon after that, Tolkien had come to the end of book 4, and he realized that the book had taken a much more mature turn than he had expected. I don't know if it's PG-13 or not, but it's something a little bit more intense than The Hobbit.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read it to my kids. I'm not going to anytime soon.
No, it's going to be a little while before they do.
Yeah.
So Tolkien realized that his original ideas for the ending were too juvenile and had to be reworked. And then he hit another wall. He wrote to Christopher in August, and this would have been still 1944, saying he was absolutely dry of any inspiration. Fortunately, that didn't last long. He was working on book 5 by October, and in March of 1945, he gave yet another of his overly optimistic estimates to Allen and Unwin. Letter 98, he says, 3 weeks with nothing else to do, and a little rest and sleep first would probably be sufficient. Of course, this 3 weeks. This wasn't really optimism. He went on to say in that very same letter, but I don't see any hope of getting them, and it is simply not the kind of stuff for odd moments. And in that same paragraph, he mentioned that what he really wanted to publish, because he keeps on coming back to this, was the Silmarillion.
Yeah. That's interesting. That one phrase, you just said that, simply is not the kind of stuff for odd moments. I'm
you can't just do this,
you can't just do this 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. You need to sit down and really spend some time with it to make any progress. Yeah.
I mean, really, it's even kind of like when we prep for these episodes. If I've got 10 minutes, I can't spend any significant time working on the podcast.
No, we have to set aside.
I've got to have like an hour or 2 hour chunks to get, bits and pieces of the outline together. If I don't do that, it's not really something you can just whip together. And that's just a discussion about it. I can't imagine
this is not exactly Lord of the Rings quality prose we're talking about here.
No,
or outlines even, because we're not even writing prose, we're writing outlines.
That is true. If that's like that for us, it's certainly not the kind of thing that you can just do in odd moments here and there when you have 5 minutes. I would imagine you'd really have to have a full day at a minimum dedicated to getting, up to speed and kind of getting back to wherever he was in the story, and then probably to have at least a few more days after that to actually get anything accomplished.
Yeah. And I also like the fact that you pointed out, again, he goes back to what he really wants to publish is the Silmarillion.
Always.
He seems to have taken all these opportunities when he's writing to Allen and Unwin to say, like, by the way, I have this Silmarillion thing.
If you're ever interested.
Yeah. Although that wasn't finished either. So like how he would have finished that, I don't know. But really it is almost a little heartbreaking sometimes to read some of this stuff, because as much as I love Lord of the Rings, and as much as I think that he came out with a masterpiece,
truly,
after all this painstaking work, it does seem like at times his heart wasn't in it. I think he was able to put his heart into it.
Yeah.
I think he was able to put his heart into it because I think that's just how he worked. I'm guessing, and obviously he must have put his heart into it because it shows. But he did kind of, I don't know. It almost feels like he's a little torn sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, like he says, the Silmarils were in his heart.
Yeah.
You got to wonder whether maybe in the back of his mind this whole time was, if I can finish this and finish it well, then maybe they'll finally publish the Silmarillion. Maybe they'll
let me do the Silmarillion. Yeah.
And so that was I'm sure a powerful motivation for him.
Yeah. I hate to imagine what was in his head about if he finishes this thing and it's not successful,
Oh goodness.
For him to think about, I don't even want to think about it.
No.
But he did keep working on it, thankfully.
Right. That is a good thing.
He did end up taking a little break at this point for a little over a year. I think from looking at Carpenter and I think looking at Hammond and Skull's stuff on this, I think there are a lot of things going on. I think he was sick for some of it. He was just busy with other work and, this little lack of motivation that he had going on.
A little writer's block, right, yeah.
Yeah. He ended up taking a break for a little over a year. During that time, he actually, interestingly, wrote the draft of the Notion Club papers, which was his rewrite of The Lost Road. I've talked about it a few times before. It's that time travel story about, the Notion Club papers version was about a group of Oxford scholars, pretty much
strikingly similar to the Inklings,
strikingly
right?
Similar to the Inklings, yeah. Kind of having these dreams about traveling to Numenor and learning the Adonaic language through their dreams.
Yeah.
Seems like such a cool story. I really wish he'd finished that.
Yeah.
Although I guess since he took a break from writing Lord of the Rings to work on that, I guess I'm glad he didn't finish it and he went back to Lord of the Rings, but mixed feelings
true. He's
about
one
that
man, a one man with finite time available. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And a day job.
Yes, that's true. Let's not forget that. That's true.
So something we can relate to. But
yeah.
So he's he's doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, again, he's kind of going to other projects. He's taking breaks. Probably just trying to avoid a little burnout on Lord of the Rings, focus on something else for a little while, come back to it fresh. But then finally in July 1946, he wrote a letter to Stanley Unwin. This is letter 105. He apologized for how long it was taking to finish Lord of the Rings.
Little do you know, it would still take more time.
Yeah, I know. He even came clean. I love this. He came clean about how he got distracted writing this other book. And he promised to get back to work on Lord of the Rings soon, which he ended up doing a few months later. It was also around this time, around mid-1946, that he went back and did some more rewrites to those earlier books of Lord of the Rings. He's definitely an edit-as-you-go kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he also, at this time, wrote the revised version of Chapter 5 of The Hobbit.
Oh, yeah.
Which all of our listeners should know all about. That's when he changed that chapter to bring it into line with the newer conception of the ring. Made Gollum a lot more sinister, a lot more corrupted.
Yeah.
And the ring itself a more of a, formidable force, not just a nice shiny trinket.
Yeah. Go back to our 3-part episode on that chapter for more. Definitely worth.
Yeah, we did a lot of comparison of the first edition text with the later text, and you could really see the difference in Gollum, or the difference in the ring, and the difference in the effect it had on Bilbo, and it was some fascinating stuff.
It really was. Well, finally, in September of 1948, Tolkien finished the first draft of The Lord of the Rings. He made his fair copies and typescripts of it over the next year and finished it by October of 1949, as we said at the beginning of the segment, 12 years after he started writing it.
Wow.
But Tolkien still had this burning desire to publish the Silmarillion, not the Lord of the Rings.
He did, yeah, and it stuck with him, the whole time he was working on Lord of the Rings, as we've kind of talked about.
Yeah.
I do give him credit that he seems to have taken Stanley Unwin's words to heart. The whole thing about mining the Silmarillion.
Oh, yeah.
For Lord of the Rings, because he certainly did that.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously we'll
masterfully,
get into some great moments as we go through that with those textual ruins that are now not ruins because we know the backstory.
That's right, because we've read the Silmarillion.
But he really did want to publish both of them together.
Yeah.
Both Hammond and Skull in the Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion, and Humphrey Carpenter in his biography, both of them say that Tolkien spent kind of those 12 years kind of just getting angrier and angrier at Alan and Unwin for rejecting the Silmarillion in the first place.
Yeah, he did. And then along came a fellow named Milton Waldman, whose name you have all heard before if you've listened to the show. He was the recipient of that amazing letter 131 that we apparently have tattooed on our arms. Waldman worked for a publisher.
Everything but, really.
Just about. I mean, I'm thinking it might be on the inside of my eyelids, but he worked for a publisher called Collins, William Collins and Sons, now part of HarperCollins. And he was interested in publishing both the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings if Tolkien could finish the Silmarillion. Now, remember the last time we mentioned the Silmarillion, it was just a bundle of incomplete manuscripts.
Right.
Right.
And here's where it gets interesting, because Tolkien, he wanted to work with Waldman. Waldman was interested.
Sure.
But he's got this obligation to Alan and Unwin. Well, Tolkien was certain that he had no legal obligation to give the Lord of the Rings to Alan and Unwin. He actually did have a clause in his contract saying that he had to offer them first rights to his next book after The Hobbit, his next
Right.
book after the Hobbit.
Offer. Yeah. Right of first refusal. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. There's that legal background coming in handy for the podcast. Thank
Every
you,
once
sir.
in a while, it's useful.
But that obligation was met because he did offer them the Silmarillion and they rejected it.
Yep. That's
They
right.
refused it. They had also, just as a side note to that, they had also published Farmer Giles of Ham in 1939. So they had even published another book after that. So
That's right.
he definitely felt like he was legally off the hook, but he still felt like he had a moral obligation to them. And I kind of love this because this moral fiber is, I think, what separates J.R.R. Tolkien from 75% of probably,
maybe 85%.
Everybody today, honestly.
Just
I
about.
don't want to single out writers. I don't want to single out any particular group because I think it's everybody. I mean, just the idea of wanting to.
If you've got an out, you take it, Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Look out for number one.
Yeah. Right. It's just kind of a thing. Everybody just knows that that's what you do. But Tolkien didn't want to do that.
No.
So he came up with an interesting way to relieve himself of his moral obligation.
Very clever.
Very clever. He actually decided to try and let them break up with him. He basically spent the next few months trying to talk
it's not
Alan
you,
and
it's
Unwin
me.
out of right.
It really is.
You would be crazy to want to. Yeah.
Yeah.
He actually spent the next few months trying to talk Alan and Unwin out of wanting to publish The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So that he could take it to Waldman at Collins.
Yeah. Well, first he tried bad-mouthing his own creation. He wrote a really long letter to Stanley Unwin calling The Lord of the Rings a disaster and saying it escaped from my control, claiming that I have produced a monster. Oh, and by the way, it's tied to the Silmarillion. Ridiculous and tiresome as you may think me, I want to publish them both, in conjunction or in connection, or I will let it all be. I shall not have any just grievance, nor shall I be dreadfully surprised, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you decline so obviously unprofitable a proposition.
Please, I'm just thinking, please don't throw me in that briar patch, Mr. Unwin.
That's about right. So then when Unwin said he just couldn't do it, with printing costs being what they were, but could Tolkien break it up into 3 or 4 self-contained volumes, Tolkien said, no, absolutely not, no way. The only division in the entire whole saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power is between the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. Oh, and by the way, he wouldn't feel aggrieved should Alan and Unwin decline. No, really, Stanley, it's okay. You can decline. Seriously, Stanley, you can turn it down. It's okay. I love it. It's brilliant.
It's great. It was brilliant. And Stanley Unwin, bless him, he really did try to make it work.
He did.
He actually asked his son Rainer, who is now 24 years old.
Wow, and probably a little more capable of objective evaluation.
Probably, yeah. So he asked Rainer what he thought of it, and Rainer said in a private letter to his father.
Oh, yes, that's important.
He said, The Lord of the Rings is a very great book in its own curious way, and deserves to be produced somehow. I never felt the lack of a Silmarillion when reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Rainer basically goes on to offer his proposition as to how this could work. Basically, he proposes, let's just add any of the really important Silmarillion material. Just add it to Lord of the Rings where it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And if we need to make space for it, well, we'll just cut some of the weaker stuff from Lord of the Rings as it is.
Oh.
And if that doesn't work, we'll just drop the Silmarillion because, it's not really that important.
Right. And he never felt the lack of it when reading it, which history will prove that he was, of course, right. I mean, nobody else
absolutely
felt a lack of the Silmarillion when reading it. You know? But Stanley Unwin does the 1950s equivalent of clicking reply all on a very personal message. I mean, really, this is like, dude, do you not know how to just put that other button, please?
I know.
How do you do this?
Please, Stanley.
Seriously, he sends the letter to Tolkien. I just can't get over that. And Tolkien was, infuriated.
I don't think he would be too happy about that.
No.
Because it's basically this letter of like, it's got a whole bunch of stuff you could cut. You could cut all this stuff.
You could cut this, you could cut that. And really, certainly you don't need
it's not that important anyway. Yeah.
So he responded by giving Unwin an ultimatum. Publish them both or you get nothing. Answer immediately. Well, answer immediately. Unwin's response, no.
Right, which of course is what Tolkien wanted in the first place.
Right.
So now he's free to pursue publication at Collins. He starts working with Milton Waldman on publishing both books.
So now we're seeing other people. I just want to make this clear. We're now
right, exactly. Yeah.
We're no longer exclusive.
We're on a break. We're seeing other people. It's all good.
Yeah.
And Waldman was interested in publishing both books, so of course he's he's going to go right to that connection, start talking to him about it. And it was around this time that Tolkien wrote our favorite letter, which was about 10,000 words long. And it explained the plots of both the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. And if he did it right, showing why they were interdependent of one another and why they both have to be published together.
Right.
Interesting note about that. Letter number 131, which is published in the letters, is primarily the Silmarillion summary, which you can probably guess from the way we've quoted it, primarily in season 1.
Yeah.
The other half of the letter that detailed the plot of Lord of the Rings is actually published in the back of Hammond and Skull's Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion.
Yes.
So
that's right.
Seriously, folks, go to the official library page and buy it. You really do need to have this book. It's full of great material.
That of all the other books we mentioned, this is the one you need to get. I mean, it may not be the one that we reference the most. I mean, I don't know. It probably will have a plurality of mentions, but not a majority of mentions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It'll be the one that we reference certainly at least once every episode. So it's worth getting, well worth it, and just a tremendous resource in reading. You'll be reading The Lord of the Rings, and right next to it, you're going to have the annotations open, and you're going to really get a lot out of the read that way. So
it's the most accessible in a lot of ways, I would say.
It really is.
Don't you think? I mean, I feel like it. If you have to pick one, like secondary source on Lord of the Rings, go with this one, because
I agree.
Just the way it's presented, the annotations and the letter and the nomenclature of the Lord of the Rings.
You don't have to read it
stuff in there,
cover to cover outside of the Lord of the Rings. You read it parallel.
Keep it next to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, getting back to the show, long story short, Milton Waldman wanted to cut the Lord of the Rings too. And he also was a little shocked when Tolkien told him that the Silmarillion, which still wasn't even finished, of course, was going to be about as long again as the Lord of the Rings was. So they went back and forth for a while until Tolkien eventually got impatient and gave Waldman an ultimatum. And you want to know what Waldman's answer was after being given an ultimatum? You guessed it. No.
Of course.
Yeah, ultimatums don't work.
I guess we're finding publishers don't like ultimatums.
Apparently not. Even from J.R.R. Tolkien.
Even from J.R.R. Tolkien, author of The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So Tolkien went back to Allen and Unwin. He wrote a letter to Rayner in June 1952 that has become rather famous. It's letter number 133, and I'll just quote a few bits from it. I'll skip around a little bit. But he says, "As for the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, they are where they were, the one finished and the end revised, and the other still unfinished or unrevised, and both gathering dust. But I have rather modified my views, better something than nothing. Although to me all are one, and the Lord of the Rings would be better far and eased as part of the whole, I would gladly consider the publication of any part of this stuff. Years are becoming precious. When I have a moment to turn round, I will collect the Silmarillion fragments in process of completion, or rather the original outline, which is more or less complete, and you can read it. But what about the Lord of the Rings? Can anything be done about that? To unlock gates I slammed myself?"
Oh, a little humility, a little...
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. What a moment that is, and I'm sure Rayner was quite pleased, because as Humphrey Carpenter says, Rayner Unwin did not need to be asked twice.
Right.
Did you want to make some more money? Why, yes, I do. He agreed to publish it, even though a book that long was really a risky proposition, and they actually could stand to lose money. He did believe in the Lord of the Rings, despite his antipathy to the Silmarillion, and really, in hindsight, who can blame him? It was piecemeal at the time.
Yeah.
But because the Lord of the Rings was so
it's
long...
worth noting that, it's worth remembering that it was not the book that we now have called the Silmarillion. It was piecemeal. It was just a collection of stuff that had not been organized yet by Christopher. So you really can't blame all these publishers for passing on it. But
no.
Anyway.
However, because The Lord of the Rings was so long and sold as one book would be prohibitively expensive, they insisted on separating it into 3 volumes, each sold for the price of a standalone book. And that, dear listeners, is how The Lord of the Rings, which is one single novel, got saddled with that moniker that still haunts it today, trilogy.
Yeah. Tolkien never, ever, 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 ever thought of it as a trilogy. He always thought, he always thought that the natural divisions, the only natural divisions within the book.
Sorry.
Don't be. That's great. No, he only thought of it divided into 6 books, the 6 books
Right.
that he organized it into.
Yeah.
He didn't even really want to give each volume its own title. I mean, he was understanding as to why they wanted to publish it in 3 volumes, but he didn't want to
Sure.
give the volumes titles, I think, to sort of avoid the perception that it was a trilogy. He actually proposed basically putting like The Lord of the Rings Volume 1, The Ring Sets Out, and The Ring Goes South, like giving each book its own title.
Right.
Volume 2 would have been The Treason of Isengard and The Ring Goes East. Volume 3 would have been The War of the Ring and The End of the Third Age.
And not The Ring Goes North by Northwest or something. We're getting all these. The Ring Goes South. The Ring Goes East. The Ring goes where it wants to go.
The ring goes everywhere. I know, it's true.
Man.
It goes south, goes east. So
there's a war. It sets out. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an age. It ends. I don't know.
Something like that.
So probably understandably concerned about being able to market 3 books with such mouthfuls of titles. Rayner actually convinced Tolkien to give each volume its own title. And after a little bit of back and forth, they came up with the 3 titles we know today.
Yep. Well, Tolkien actually preferred The War of the Ring to The Return of the King because, let's face it, Return of the King sort of gives away the ending. But Rayner preferred it, so Tolkien gave in. And obviously, at this point, Tolkien just wanted to see the darn thing in print. And finally...
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. On July 29th, 1954, he finally did. The Fellowship of the Ring was published on that date.
And The Two Towers came out soon after, November 11th, 1954.
Mm-hmm.
The Return of the King took a little bit longer. Tolkien was still working on the appendices through 1955, and he was also working on some stuff that he intended to put in the appendices, but ended up being cut and eventually ended up published in Unfinished Tales. But there I go digressing again. Return of the King was published on October 20th, 1955.
My goodness.
And from that point, listeners, I think you probably know the rest, or at least enough of it. I mean,
right.
You don't need Alan and I to tell you the sensation The Lord of the Rings became because you know what it is today, right?
That's true. I mean, just like with The Hobbit and with the rest of Tolkien's work today, response to The Lord of the Rings was mixed, but it was generally positive, as befits something that would one day be voted the #1 book of the century. Literary critics all around the world, they wailed and gnashed their teeth, of course, while Tom Shippey just watched and laughed. Oh, man. Love that guy. W.H. Auden, who reviewed Fellowship for the New York Times Book Review and Encounter magazine, and who also had an ongoing correspondence with Tolkien, would go on to write, "Nobody seems to have a moderate opinion. Either, like myself, people find it a masterpiece of its genre, or they cannot abide it."
Tolkien doesn't seem to have minded this polarized response to his masterwork one bit.
No.
He actually wrote a poem about it, which is printed in Carpenter's biography, and it goes, "The Lord of the Rings is one of those things. If you like it, you do. If you don't, then you boo." Tolkien wrote this himself.
That's awesome.
So obviously he wasn't losing any sleep over his many detractors.
No, not at all. Apparently, though, when the book came out, some of Tolkien's Oxford colleagues told him things like, "Well, now we know what you've been doing all these years. You've had your fun, and now you must do some work." That's how Humphrey Carpenter puts it. But I can't help recalling something John Garth said to us at Mythmoot. So this is actually in episode 88, if you want to go listen to that. He talked about how the folks at Oxford wished that Tolkien had spent more time doing academic work, while we all wish that he'd spent less time doing academic work and more time writing fantasy.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are some folks, I know there are some folks who are glad that he spent some time doing both. And, as we said in the last episode on Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics, and I think we're paraphrasing Michael Drought on this, if he had never written The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien would still be known for, his huge contribution to Beowulf scholarship.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, for the rest of us, it was with the publication of The Lord of the Rings that he became our professor.
Yeah, that's right. It really is. Man. What else can we say? I mean, in our intro to The Hobbit, this was the point at which we started talking a little bit about our first time reading the book. But I feel like we've talked about that already, especially since we just talked to Verlin Flieger about it a few episodes ago.
Yeah, when she started asking us.
When she interviewed us.
Fun. Yeah. That
Would
was
you like
fantastic.
to come on our show and interview us?
That was great. I loved it.
That was awesome. I absolutely loved it. High point of the show.
Definitely. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, we did just talk about it a few episodes ago. And I mean, I think honestly, the answer might be a little bit simpler, I guess, for that question. I mean, I think for both of us, we read The Lord of the Rings because we had already read The Hobbit.
Right.
And we wanted more.
Yeah.
I know that's true for me, and I think it's true for you
Totally
too.
true for me. That's exactly why.
But I also think for both of us, and probably like many people, it was really reading The Lord of the Rings that made us realize just how special Tolkien's world actually was.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the question to ask for this episode is, at what point while reading The Lord of the Rings did you realize how important this book was going to be, to you in your life? Like, what was that moment when you're reading The Lord of the Rings and you suddenly realized, oh, this is my thing now. I'm totally going to be
my
obsessed
total
with this
obsession
book.
for the rest of my life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It didn't take me long at all, really. As much as I enjoyed The Hobbit as a then teenager, I was, kind of anxious to put behind what, at the time, I saw as a kid's book.
Sure.
Obviously now that we've spent season 2 on The Hobbit, I see all those deeper themes and things. But as a 14-year-old, I didn't. I just wanted to put behind the kid's book and read the bigger stuff. And while the very early tone of The Lord of the Rings was somewhat similar to The Hobbit, by the time we were facing black riders and Barrow-wights, I knew this was a much more grown-up tale. And the bit with the Barrow-wight also began to help me get that feeling of the vast history that lay behind the primary story. But I have to say that meeting Aragorn at the Prancing Pony was probably the moment for me. I could tell, I think, that there was much, much more to this character, and I was really excited to find out. And of course, by the time I got to book 3, I knew this was going to be something that I would read and reread and reread as often as possible.
Yeah. I think for me, it was probably the beginning of book 3 is the first moment that I really realized that it was going to be more than just another fantasy book for me.
The Three Hunters. Yeah.
Yes. I was already hooked on the story, and I loved every moment of Fellowship. But when I got to book 3 and, Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are pursuing the Uruk-hai across the plains, chapter 2, the Riders of Rohan, that was one of my favorite moments in all my first few readings. I always loved the Rohirrim, even before I realized that my last name means Lord of the Mark. I didn't figure that out until I was in college, and I was already way into the Rohirrim by that point. But really, I think it was their appearance in the story, and suddenly that, you think back to some of the stuff Tolkien said about, Faramir showing up and this expansion of Gondor and Rohan. It was that was the moment where the story just kind of like expanded so much. It just blew up exponentially larger. And I think that is the point at which I realized I was going to be hooked on this book for the rest of my life. I did love every moment of Fellowship, but Two Towers really sealed it.
Yeah.
And I guess by the time I got to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, which I've told you before is like my favorite moment in the whole story, Éowyn and Merry versus the Witch King. When I got to Éowyn and Merry versus the Witch King, I was just like, I just want to read this again. I just want to go back to the very beginning and read this whole book again up to that point.
Yeah.
And it's like every reading since then has been sort of like chasing that feeling, and it's never the same, but you find something new every time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't get that first time experience ever again. I mean, by definition, and I think we talked about this with Dr. Flieger, that you can't read it as a first time reader more than once by definition.
Right.
And, you can always try to find something new to kind of simulate that experience. I think my answer was reading it with my wife before the films came out, probably my 20th read, but it was her first. And so I got to sort of experience it through her eyes. But
for me, it was reading it aloud to my kids when they were babies. They were like, 4 or 5 months old, really, really young. They didn't understand any of it. Obviously they were newborns, but for me, reading it aloud, that just completely transformed it for me.
Reading things aloud really does, doesn't it? I mean, that's something I've noticed.
It really does.
In the show. Even with our research and doing our outlines and kind of prepping for the show, we'll get in and we'll read a passage, and all of a sudden something will come up that we didn't even touch on in our research because the reading aloud changed it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which is why we'll be reading it aloud when we read The Lord of the Rings. Not the whole thing, of course. That would be an audiobook.
And we can't do that, folks.
No, I wish we could, but they won't let us. Our lawyers won't let us. So here's our plan for tackling The Lord of the Rings. Yes, we do surprisingly have a plan because this book is just too important. We really want to do it right. I don't know what we did with the Silmarillion and the Hobbit, but we tried. So no, we're going to
keep getting better.
We definitely, exactly. Keep getting better.
Onwards and upwards every time.
Always. We're going to be taking our time, folks. We've worked it out to what, about 6 pages an hour? Now, that's quite a bit slower than we went through The Hobbit, probably about 40% slower. I think we were at about 8 or 9 pages an hour. And it's actually a little slower than our pace through the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're going to be spending a season on each book. So as we've said before, earlier in this episode and also on our social media and places like that, season 3 is just going to be covering book 1. So that's up to when Frodo and his friends get to Rivendell. Based on our current schedule, that should take us up to about June of 2019. And yes, we are going to give it the full Prancing Pony podcast treatment.
That is absolutely right. So we won't be hitting the Council of Elrond until season 4. But we will be reading the important passages and some that we just really like and want to read. We'll be talking through the plot, of course, like we've done before. And with The Lord of the Rings, a lot of that is going to be keeping the timeline straight, helping keep track of what's going on in all the various plot threads, especially as we get to books 3 and beyond, really.
Yeah, definitely. As we always do, we're going to be bringing in material from the history of Middle-earth when it's useful, mainly when it's useful to understand the finished text. Yeah. I don't really see us spending too much time on the really rejected material.
No.
We'll probably make some mention of some of the fun stuff, like when Frodo was called Bingo or Strider was called Trotter, but I don't think we're gonna really pour over rejected ideas unless they're interesting.
No.
To enlighten the finished version of the story.
That's right. Trying to do what we did with The Hobbit in that regard.
Yeah.
I mean, we touched on it a lot, but really only where it was, helpful for understanding the finished version. Now, of course, we're going to bring references to the rest of the Legendarium when it sheds light on what's going on. We're going to help you rebuild some of those textual ruins. And of course, we're going to talk all about the stuff that we love to talk about. Classic themes like pride and mortality, the fall, language and philology, mythology, folklore, fate and free will, subcreation, you name it.
Yep. And if you have any questions, you know where to send them.
Absolutely. Well, that does wrap it up for our discussion, but be sure to come back next week when, yes, we really do finally start reading The Lord of the Rings.
And before we move on to Barliman's Bag, we want to ask you to consider joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's our family of supporters over at Patreon. We're about $400 to $500 away from our next goal of setting up a Discord server and allowing patrons a chance to listen in while we record one of these shows, giving you a chance to laugh at our mistakes and, hey, also giving you a sneak peek in an upcoming episode.
Why did we name that as our goal?
I know, right?
That's good. People are going to love that. And of course,
this sounds like a great idea. Let's let everybody see what we left on the cutting room floor.
Exactly.
Well, that's what Christopher did with the history of Middle-earth, so I guess we can
that's true. This is sort of the history of the Prancing Pony podcast.
Right.
Which is nowhere near as interesting as the history of Middle-earth, but still. If you do join the Fellowship of the Podcast, you're also going to get access to exclusive content like a full-length bonus episode every quarter, and there's already a library of them, as well as short postscripts to each episode. Of course, there's another way you can help us. Check out the official library page at our website, prancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show.
You can also give us a hand by posting a review on iTunes. This increases our visibility. That means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a more vibrant Tolkien community.
And finally, don't forget to share us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, wherever you hang out, wherever you might find Tolkien fans, tell them about our show. Now with that, it's time to see what old Barliman has in the mailbag for us. Sean, what do we have?
Okay, well, our first question comes to us from Dina in Israel. She says, I'm rereading Lord of the Rings and just read the bit about the hobbits coming back to Rivendell and meeting a very old and tired Bilbo. When he gives his book to Frodo, there's a mention there of his spidery hand, which I always thought of as a side effect of old age. But in The Hobbit, it is said at the unexpected party that the letters Bilbo writes come out crooked and hard to read. She says, my question is, why was it so important to Tolkien to tell us that of Bilbo? We knew he was a fantastic calligrapher, speaking of Tolkien, and I dare say his own handwriting was very good. As someone with a horrible handwriting, thank you, Luvatar, for keyboards, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I can sympathize there.
Definitely, yeah. And I guess I'll answer this with my theory. I think Dina is probably already picking up on the way I'm going to go. I think Tolkien is thinking of himself and his own handwriting here.
Yeah, I agree.
It might seem hard to believe to anybody who's seen some of the astonishingly beautiful calligraphy Tolkien produces, which Dina alluded to. But I think there's really more to the story there. Tolkien was capable of incredibly beautiful handwriting when he took his time. You can see that by looking at his handwriting and any of his art that he's done, either in J.R.R. Tolkien, Artist and Illustrator, which is also edited by Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull, or in Tolkien, Maker of Middle-earth, which is the book from the Bodleian exhibition that's going on right now.
Yep. Or even the captions to some of the pictures in The Hobbit.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, he really could do incredible calligraphy.
Yeah.
But I also know from reading Christopher's commentaries in the history of Middle-earth, and I also know this from a few of the guests we've had on the show who've actually had the chance to go through Tolkien's original manuscripts. When he was in a rush, which was a lot of the time. Yeah, he wrote very quickly in this scrawly, sometimes almost illegible handwriting. And there's at least one place that I can think of in the history of Middle-earth where Christopher Tolkien describes his father's handwriting on a map, I believe it was, as spidery.
I think so. And it's also in the Father Christmas letters. The handwriting that Tolkien used for Father Christmas's own messages was described as spidery.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Seemingly, it's just a trait of his own that he applied to Bilbo and to Father Christmas, probably because it was amusing to him.
Probably so. Or maybe even because he liked to imagine that the manuscript he had written was actually written by Bilbo. You know, maybe that was just a bit of the frame story for him. Who knows?
Yeah, that works too. Well, do we have another question for us tonight?
We do. We've got one more from Paul R. in Guelph, Ontario. Paul writes, I am curious to whether either of you have ever listened to the BBC radio dramatization where Ian Holm plays Frodo. Of course, like the movies, it does not strictly follow the books, but I have listened and enjoyed it many times. Just curious on your thoughts.
Oh, my.
Alan, why don't you go first?
Oh, of course. Well, yes, but it has been a very long time. I think I checked out the cassette tapes from a library many decades ago. Might have been 8 tracks. Okay, maybe not. I don't think it ever came out on 8-track, but it's been a long time. I certainly don't own a set, let's put it that way. My memories of it are fond, but they have faded. So I'll definitely have to give them another listen, though. I will say that I definitely remember Ian Holm, but that's about all I can say, to be honest.
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with this. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm not familiar with it. I know about it, but I've only just started listening to little bits and pieces of it.
Oh wow, you've read it more recently then.
Yeah, very recently I started getting around to listening to it because I've had it. I just have not ever sat down and stopped to listen to it. I keep seeing people talking about it on Facebook, which is why I finally decided to pick it up. So I have started listening to it. I'm up to the Prancing Pony, basically right where they meet Strider.
Yay!
So yeah, your moment. And I guess my initial reactions, I mean, I guess you can take these with a grain of salt because I haven't really finished it yet. But I mean,
well, yeah, pretty early in the story, really.
Very early. I mean, I like a lot of the casting. I think Ian Holm is a great Frodo, even though sometimes when he's working in the crowd, like in the Prancing Pony, all I can think of is Ian Holm as Bilbo in Peter Jackson's movies. Yeah. Bill Nighy is Sam. He's one of my favorite English actors, and he's great as Sam. Not who you would think of as Sam, but he does a great job. And the actor who does Pippin as well, I can't remember his name, but he's got a really neat take on the character. He's not as bratty as he was in the movies. To borrow Tom Shippey's film, Shippey's word. I don't know. I mean, I like it. Doesn't strictly follow the books, but it does make use of a lot of dialogue from the books. But I don't know. I like it. I mean, in general, I think I've been enjoying it. And there's other adaptations that well, I'll just say it this way: it surpasses other adaptations in some ways, and in some ways, I like other adaptations more. So it's but it's good though. It's definitely worth listening to.
Good. Well, excellent. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week when we really, finally, truthfully, honestly, start reading the text of The Lord of the Rings. We will be covering the prologue, including some of our and your favorite passages from Concerning Hobbits, Of the Finding of the Ring, and Tolkien's wonderful in-character note on the Shire records.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun. I can't wait.
Isn't it? It's so much fun.
Yeah. So thank you for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends, folks. See the comments, the questions, the corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And also a special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, and Emily in Texas. We want to thank all of you.
To make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast, subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, invitations to your own long-expected party to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And well, we'll try to get him into our next show if we can't go to the party ourselves. Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
farewell, friends.